I think the first time I would say we became aware of JR rather than met him physically, somebody handed us a tape, an audio tape called the Toiji, the Gaze of God. And we listened to that tape, and it was as if the energy of that thing just went right into us. And we recognized this is somebody who we would really like to have more to do with in our lives.
Do you remember the year?
Yes, it was 1978. It was probably March of 1978. And right after that, we began studying in the movement. We started on discourses. And then a couple of months after that, we received a letter from MSIA telling us about Insight One, and that there was going to be an Insight One in LA over July 4th. And we thought that it would be a series of lectures by John Roger. We really had no idea what it was. And we decided we would sign up for it. And we came to LA and we took that. We met JR physically the very first night. We were standing outside the door at the Sheraton Universal.
With our friend Robert Waterman, who was the one who brought us, who was the one who gave us that tape in the first place. And JR knew Robert, he didn't know us.
But he came around the corner, walking down that long corridor towards the ballroom doors, and he just came right over to the three of us. And of course he greeted Robert, he knew Robert, and then we were introduced. And Ron and Robert really wanted to meet with JR. So at that time, he still made his own appointments. He took this tiny little appointment book out of his pocket with a little pen, and they agreed on a time. And then he looked at us all and he said, who would like to be there? Ron said he would, and Robert said he would, and I didn't say anything. And he said, well, what about you? And I said, oh, I'm very busy, which I must just, I mean, I just think that is so.
I don't know if I'll have time for that.
Because I was teaching summer school at the time in New Mexico, and I knew I needed to be back to teach my classes. And he looked at me and he gave me this little smile, and he said, I'm going to put your name down, so in case if you'd like to be there, you can. And of course, we did Insight One, which was extraordinary. And then I came back the next weekend and took a service seminar. And our meeting was going to be the day after that. And by then, there was absolutely no question that I would be at that meeting.
And that meeting was pivotal, because at the end of the meeting, which was the business part of it, we said we have a personal matter we'd like to discuss with you. And JR promptly dismissed everybody else. I mean, there probably were a good 6, 8 people at that meeting at the time that were his staff. And I said to him, I said, JR, I have a concern. You know, I'm thinking of marrying Mary. And JR says, oh, a personal, impersonal relationship. You know, while I'm mulling over that, I said, well, my question is, if I marry Mary, will that tend to take me off of my spiritual path? And JR said yes, which was not the answer I was hoping for. But he said yes, and then there's this long pause, and he says, if you let it, if you let it. And then he said, personally, I think it would be a really good idea, because your energies match each other very well, and together you could do a lot of good work together. So right from that meeting, we went back to the Sheraton Universal, which is where we were staying, and I proposed to Mary right on the spot. And that was how, as a direct result of that meeting, and of course that was 30 years ago.
That's awesome. Question that came up with, can you talk about a couple stories, 1 or 2 stories that really stick in your mind about JR and you, and what that, you know, what are the anecdotes? And it could be a trip you took together, the Light Castle. Mention dates and places, that really helps.
Well, I think a couple of years after that, well, we were teaching at New Mexico State, and when we got married, then things began to really happen very fast around us. I was being groomed to be chair of the department that we were in, and also dean of the college. And now that we were married, all these concerns with regard to nepotism and Ron remaining in the department where we were working together came forward. And they wanted him to accept a position in the counseling center or a research position. Mm-hmm. And we really wanted to work together. We didn't know exactly what form that would take, but we knew we wanted to work together. And so I made a radical decision, and that was that I would resign my position. And following—
They didn't like that at all.
Following that, we took a year-long honeymoon. And during the course of that time, there was a lot of focus on just being together and enjoying our relationship, but also the question of what were we going to do. And JR and the staff came to Las Cruces where there was going to be an Insight One. We were the team captains for that Insight One. And we had a meeting with JR. And at that time, in the meeting, Ron mentioned some possibilities of things we could do. And JR started telling us about Kohenar University. And he talked about it quite a bit, and we had not heard about it. And at the end of the meeting, he knew we were coming to California for about a month around conference time. And he said, after that, things will be much clearer. Things will be much clearer.
And let's get together.
Yes.
So we get together, we have another meeting with him. What?
Well,
go ahead.
Well, no, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Because that's not quite the way I remember it.
Well, let's do your version.
Well, the way I remember it, we were at conference, and at that time, they really went on for a long time. There were multiple events, and we were doing all of the events. And we came home to New Mexico. Some friends of ours, Pat and Dean Lunn, who are also in the movement, were going to come visit us in a few days, and we were going to spend some time together. Well, meanwhile, one morning I woke up very early, like about 5 o'clock, and I'd had a dream. And Ron was still asleep, so I went outside. We had a large backyard that was kind of a courtyard backyard, and I was walking up and down on the patio just contemplating this dream. And Ron came out to me and he said, "What are you doing? Why are you out here?" And I told him the dream, and in the dream it had become clear that we were to do this school that JR had told us about. Oh, even after all this time, it brings tears to my eyes. And so we went inside and made coffee and started talking about it. We waited till it was late enough to call California, and we talked to someone in the MSA office saying that we would very much like to meet with JR. And
no, we had just been with them. You know. And they said, well, I'll check with JR. And they got back to us very shortly and said, JR says, come ahead. So we flew back out to California, and we sit down in this meeting with JR, and we say, well, you know, we'd really like to talk more about this university. What's available? And JR says, well, see, he said, you're the first people to come along with both the consciousness and the credentials to be able to do this, so you get to choose whatever jobs you want at the university. And I'm thinking, well, you mean I could be the head, we could be the head of the counseling department? As if there was a counseling department. We could be the head of the counseling department? And JR, you know what infinite patience the man had. JR says, well, yeah, see, you're the first people to come along with the consciousness and the credentials. You get to have any jobs you want. So if you want to have the head of the counseling department, you can have that job. Of course, all the jobs on top of that one will have to be filled in before that one becomes available. But if you want that one, that's your job. Mary starts to get a clue, which is the way things very often happen with the two of us. Mary says, Jerry, are you saying that I could be the academic vice president of the whole university? Now remember, we were working in a big university. That's a huge position. You mean I could be the academic vice president of the whole university? And George says, well, see, you're the first people to come along with the credentials and you can have any job you want. You want to be the academic vice president? You get to be the academic vice president. And I say, well, you mean I could be the president? He says, well, no. He said, you can't be the president. He said, I have to maintain that position until I can be satisfied that I know that you can fulfill it. But in the meantime, you can be the chief administrative officer, and that way you and Mary would be, no, you could be the administrative vice president. That way you and Mary would be the co-directors. You both report to me directly, and we could start that way. And so, what shall we say? The rest is history. That's exactly the road that we went down. And then there was another time when we were going for state approval. This was probably...
Mary wants to do something.
I want to add that when we got the call back from JR saying to come ahead, that he would meet with us. We were driving from our home, which was in a tiny little town called Tularosa, to the airport in El Paso for our flight to LA. And on the way, there was the most magnificent double rainbow. It was just extraordinary. And to me, that was just really a sign from Spirit that was guiding us in the direction that would become the fulfillment of really what our destiny is. So
another memorable, it seems though most of our stories have to do with meetings with JR. And this was probably 2 years later, 3 years later?
Probably about 2.
About 2 years later, where we were attempting to get state approval. We already had, what do they call it? Authorization, which means you can operate the school. You have to have that to start, and then the next level is approval. Approval means that the state has come in and evaluated what you're doing, and they deem it appropriate that what you say you're doing is in fact what you're doing. So obviously you have to have a couple of years of graduates before you can demonstrate that. So we come up for a state visit after that 2-year period, and the committee had a total of 5 members on it. And the committee voted 2 for and 2 against. 2 people thought that we had demonstrated, 2 thought that we hadn't. The guy who is the state consultant who's running the meeting, he comes to us and he says, this is the situation. 2 for, 2 against, we're deadlocked. And we said, well, what seems to be the problem? And he said, well, the problem seems to be that John Roger is both the president of the university and the head of this church. And so the concern is this separation of church and state. So he said, he got what we were doing. He said, but I think I know a way around it. And we said, well, before you tell us that, from here, we're going to have a meeting with JR. We'll tell him what you've said, and let's see, you know, what ideas he might have that we might then come back to you, and then we could put it together. He said, great. So we went and we met with JR down in his office, and we lay this out to him. And JR listens to this whole thing, and his response was to simply pick up the phone, and he dialed Catherine Bussery, who was his secretary at the time, and he simply dictated his letter of resignation as president of the university. And he turned to us and he said, you have now demonstrated that you can do this. So you are now the president. And he said, furthermore, you're going to be receiving a similar letter from every one of the board members, the current board members, resigning. And part of your initial task is to formulate your own board so that you will have people in it that will support what you're doing. So of course we went back to the consultant and we told him this, that we think it's probably no longer a problem. He's not the president anymore. Bob Welty, which was the guy's name, God bless that man, he said, all right, in that case, I will cast the deciding vote in favor of the university. And that's how we got our approval, which we've had for close to 30 years now.
Wow.
So that was just an amazing vote of confidence on JR's part. And he made it very clear. He said, if I wanted to run a school, and I would do it the way I would want to do it. He said, but if you've ever had a dream of having a school and doing it the way you always wished education could be, here is your opportunity. So,
and I agree with him. You've demonstrated it.
yeah. And he said, I don't want to be watching you every day. No news from me is good news. And he has made good on that ever since.
What, let's segue to food. Have you ever gone out to dinner with John Roger, and what is your favorite food? Or have you ever, I know you've had meetings. Has those meetings been around food?
Not really.
Can you think of
We've never been part of the donut club.
But we've had plenty of dinners with JR.
what do you call was the food?
What do we call it the food?
At the dinner, what do you recall the food was?
Lamb chops. Seems like he loves lamb chops. That's what I'm remembering primarily.
Which would work well, because we love lamb chops. Other than that, I would never say that food became anything that we really ever talked about.
So if JR, I think in what you explained, I think that answers the question of the Wayshower and how you've passed it on to your school. How about, is there another anecdotal story that was it at a trip, was it somewhere, was it at a meeting? Something also that I could use for coverage to cut away. I mean, I would use some university stuff, but is there something else that was memorable in the studies with JR?
One of the things that...
like, were you at a meeting? Did you go travel? Did he come to you? Or was it on a plane or something like that?
Well, in 1987, he invited us to go on PAT 4, but we weren't able to because of the academic calendar. So the following year, somehow we got that we needed to go. So we go on this trip, and first we go to Israel. And the very first morning when we woke up, we were at the kibbutz, and just this terrible feeling had come over me. It's like I wanted to go home. It's just like I had no idea why, but I turned to Ron and I said, I just want you to know, I really want to go home. And I said, I'm not going to be talking about this every day, but just in case you pick up on this energy, that's what's going on for me. So I'm sitting downstairs, waiting to go upstairs for breakfast, and JR walks by me and he looks at me and he says, well, how are you? And of course I lied and told him I was fine. But the trip was just like an ordeal for me. And Israel was only the beginning. I mean, Egypt was just like staying alive. And so the last night of the trip, we're at a club, and I am so happy because we're going home. And that trip was about a month long. And as we're getting ready to leave the club, JR comes over to me and he says, well, how are you doing, Mary? And I said, I'm doing great, JR. And I give him this big smile, and he says, well, he said, when we get home, maybe it would be good if we could sit down and talk a little bit about this trip. And I said, oh, I would love that. You know, because by this time, I'm in a euphoric state. I can hardly wait to get home. So we get home to LA, and within a couple of weeks, I realized that I just still feel a kind of disturbance. And so we write to him, and I ask if we can have that meeting we had talked about, that he had spoken about. So we have the meeting, and you know, we start talking about the trip, and he said to me, he said, Mary, you had a tremendous amount of Egyptian karma. And he said, I was really instructed by Spirit that I could not speak to you about it while we were on the trip unless you wanted to go home. Which I never said to him. And so we talked a lot about the things that had gone on, but he said to me, he said, "You really need to go again," which was just the last thing I wanted to hear. That was just like, oh, no, oh, can't do that again. So, and I said, "Oh, JR, isn't there an alternative?" He said, well, he said, you could become very ill. He said you could have a terrible car accident, or he said you could go mad. Well, none of those were very appealing. And so reluctantly, I said, okay, I'll go again. And he said, besides, we didn't even go to the places that you need to go to. You need to go to Talamarna, you need to go down in the pit of the Great Pyramid, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So, but at least I have several months to prepare myself. But the sweetest thing about this was, a few days later, we were teaching a class, and we were teaching it at some place up in Thousand Oaks. And in the middle of the weekend, all of a sudden, JR and one of his sidekicks appear, and he had come to just look in on me and just see how I was doing. And, you know, that to me is just such a hallmark of the John Roger that I know and love, just him always there. And the next summer we did go on this trip, and I was such a spiritual warrior on that trip. I mean, I recited my ministerial blessing inwardly every step of ground that I walked over. I had one experience there where we were at one of the temples, the one with all the little crocodiles, and it was after lunch, and we had fallen asleep, and there was going to be a large gathering, and we must have just gone completely out because a knock came at the door. It was Vincent saying, "We're all upstairs. You know, John Roger wants to know where you are, and are you going to come upstairs?" So we came upstairs, and very shortly after that, we all went off the boat to walk over to this particular temple. And I was just like walking in dread every step of the way for some reason. And we get there, and it's the one where you go down under this little place. I think it was a place that in ancient times people swam under there. So everybody's going down under there.
It's an initiation place, as I recall.
Yes, yeah. And I'm watching everybody do this, and I know that I need to do it, but I just, you know, I just have this sort of dread or impending doom. So I'm standing there, and Betsy Taylor comes over to me, and she says to me, "Are you all right?" I said, "Well, more or less." And Timothea came over to me too, and they just both held with me, and I eventually was the last one who went under there. But when I came out of there, I went into shock, and it was you know, who knows exactly what was being cleared there. But I know John Roger was incredible. He had staff who really supported me, who took care of me, and there were other events like that on the trip. But I must say, again, I always felt so loved, so cared for, and so supported in clearing the things that I needed to clear.
If there was one thing that I would say over all the years...
Some sirens coming by.
Oh. Hold for sirens. Oh, okay. Now I understand.
That's great stuff. Great stuff.
Yeah.
Thanks for
See you, Richard.
Are we good?
We're clear now.
All right. You want to hit one, Dave?
As I look back over the time of the time that we've known JR, if there was one thing that I would look to, it would be the level of consistent loving that I've watched him demonstrate over all of those years. I would have to say, although I've seen him be stern with people, I never ever witnessed him relating to people in an uncaring way. And there's not a lot of people that I could say that about. But he demonstrated the thing that he was teaching. And that has become a great inspiration for the work that we do at the University of Santa Monica, because he really demonstrated that it's not, what you say is not what's important. It's where you're coming from inside when you say it that means everything. And it's on that realization that we've really built what we've built.
So now the final thing is, one at a time, would you tell JR, what would you want to tell JR? You could tell it to the camera or to me. What would you like JR to hear?
JR, I love you. Your exampleship has inspired my life. It's informed my life. And if I were to distill down all the experiences and all the teachings, the essence of it for me that I have learned from you is, no matter what the question is, the answer is loving.
And Jay, I would only add to what Mary is saying, is that mine would be, I'll call it a vote of thanks and gratitude. Gratitude for having enough confidence in us to give us the opportunity that you gave to us to do the University of Santa Monica as a school that we always wished education would be, which means largely experiential and demonstrating the things that we would like people to learn, not by telling it to them, but by us all experiencing it together. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Cut. Beautiful.